There it is, the Morning Mix. We are launching a new segment this morning that we are all very excited about. We're going to debate the hot topics everyone is buzzing about this morning. The big shakeups in television, also those bankers in the hot seat over huge bonuses, big congressional hearing today. Here to tackle those controversies, we are joined by Tina Brown, editor of the Daily Beast, also Larry Hackett, managing editor of People magazine. And let's begin with television. Sarah Palin last night had her debut on Bill O'Reilly. Let's take a little bit of a look at something she said.
I think that these are the political establishment reporters who love to gin up controversy and spin up gossip. The rest of America doesn't care about that kind of crap.
Responding, of course, to that buzzy book, Game Change. Tina, how'd you do last night?
Well, you know, I think she's got to lose just being a victim. I mean, if that's the only brand, you know, it's going to tire off for a while. It's interesting, she used the word uncomfortableness when she talked about how the electorate felt about Obama right now. And that's kind of what she projects. But that also is, of course, what makes her riveting to watch.
She did. She was in pretty loving hands there with Bill O'Reilly. He pushed her a couple of times. But Larry, one of the things I noticed, and I went through this transition, going from politics to being an analyst, it's very different going from being an advocate to someone who steps back and analyzes the news.
Well, as I was watching, I was wondering, what is she going to do? I kept saying, it said, you know, news contributor. I'm not sure what that means. I mean, she was clearly on in a kind of political role last night. She will be obviously warmly received by people who watch Fox generally. But the issue for her is, what does she do when she goes on? I think she has to break out of the message, the common sense conservatism, and say different things. I watched, a lot of people watched. I'm dying to see what the ratings are. But the more she's on, I don't know how it seems to have to change. She has to metamorphosize into something else. Otherwise, I think people might get bored.
Yeah, Tina said the same thing. The numbers are going to be huge. She has a tremendous following. But, you know, some are wondering if it's the right move, because sometimes she can misspeak. Sometimes she can say things that aren't quite factual. And if she is thinking about possibly getting back into politics on the line, you know, could this be?
Well, you know, on the face of it, it seems like a great role. I mean, as a politician, she was often in error but never in doubt, right? So now she can get to be a pundit where it doesn't really matter if you're in error, frankly, and you don't ever have to be in doubt. But at the same time, she might also discover what she's sort of discovered as a candidate. It's harder than it looks. It's actually harder than it looks to be a good pundit on the air. You've got to have stuff to say.
But if the idea is for her to get better at what she does and better at interviews, there's no better environment for her to do that.
That's true, Larry.
Well, yeah, and she starts out with an audience that is predisposed to love her. I got to say, I don't think she's going to come back into politics. I think this is the alternative to politics for Sarah Palin.
She's in very good hands, though. You know, Roger Ailes, of course, who runs Fox, in his old, role as a political consultant, he was the guy who made Richard Nixon camera ready. So, you know, if you're going to learn how to be telegenic as a politician, she sure
he wanted Sarah Palin.
And she could become something of a kingmaker, to your point. There may be somebody else who perhaps doesn't have her baggage, who may be smoother, who may be more articulate, but who she then, decides and say, this is the one, this is the one I support. That's pretty powerful. I think you're onto something.
A lot of power and a lot of influence right there. Okay. And by the way, this truly is the round table.
Yes,
look at it. It really is a round table. Let's talk about what's going on in late night. And we saw Conan O'Brien last night, and we were wondering, because Jay Leno said, yep, I'll go back to my old time. That sounds good. But we didn't really know what Conan would do. But let's hear what he said last night.
Welcome to NBC, where our new slogan is no longer just screwing up prime time, huh?
They are having a field day in taking shots.
It's really heavy.
Have you ever seen anything like this?
No, and this is the best thing for NBC's late night ratings that could ever happen right now, because obviously everyone's tuning in to see what's going to go on. They're in a really tough spot. And obviously for years, they've been trying to pack 10 pounds of talent into a 5-pound bag. There's only one show. So they're in a really, really difficult position right now. I thought he left the door open yesterday by saying, I didn't want to have the show start the next day. I mean, does he start then?
You think he leaves the door open after he says, I'm not going to participate in the destruction of the show?
A lot of us cheered when we heard that he was, that he wasn't negotiable about the time slot. I mean, how much garbage does poor Conan have to have dumped on his head? I mean, they have jostled this guy around to such a degree. I mean, I know his audience is not as big as it was, sitting in that spot. But, that argument is one that NBC had at the time of Letterman versus
Letterman. Listen, I like Conan an awful lot, but he was given a $45 million golden parachute. You can jostle somebody around for that, right?
If you can go from $45 million to poor Conan is a pretty good distance to travel.
No, but I actually do think that the talent here has to be listened to just a bit. I mean, Jay Leno knew what made his audience work for him. He knew why it worked. He's the guy who's doing it every night for 17 years, and then they move him off into this 10 o'clock spot.
He never wanted to move.
He didn't want to move. He said, don't move me. It's not going to work. They did it, and it didn't, you know?
It didn't work. But is it going to work without Simon Cowell? Would you like that segue? The segue going into Simon Cowell. Not to be on American Idol. Well,
I think it's very tough. I mean, I know the show is the show, but I think he has been the linchpin. If you watched it last night, every time someone was on, they all turned to him.
Yeah.
And when they would try to be different, if Randy, for example, was sort of leading the decision, it's just not the same. I know there are, I think it's going to be very, very tough. I mean, Paula left. I like Paula. The show carried on. Without him or some other kind of British bomb thrower, it's going to be really hard. Because part of the show is this adversity.
That, you know, American Idol without Cowell is like Silence of the Lambs without Hannibal. I mean, we all did turn on to see him chew people up. But
especially when he's going to have his own show, The X Factor, which is basically American Idol on steroids, that's going to be competing with it.
Which we may see him back with Paula Abdul.
And more about judges fighting, apparently. That whole show is about, because the judges have teams who they support, and that's really about the judges banging heads.
Idol was getting a certain amount of battle fatigue, though, wasn't it? I mean, it does give Idol the sort of the incentive to kind of reinvent now.
Rejigger, retool. Just a couple minutes left. Let's get to what's going to happen today on Capitol Hill. All these major bankers being called on the House. So we've been talking a lot about that this week, Larry. And I think the question is, when they go forward and are asked about this financial crisis that they seem to be profiting off of now, how much contrition, how much apology do you expect to see?
Well, apparently they're not going to be doing. I think there'll be some. I mean, the word apology is something that's kind of a real red flag, and you don't go there. I don't see them having. I don't see there's any downside to being as apologetic as possible. You know, beating up on Wall Street is something that's going to be eternal. So I think they should be probably as abject as they can be. Whether or not they will, it remains to be seen. They will be judged by how much they do or don't.
We tend to always keep thinking, though, that bankers see the world in a way that other people do, in some ways. I mean, the apologies anyway are going to have to be empty. I mean, ultimately, the economy got wrecked by all this incredible, crazy conduct that went on. And, at this point, I think that they just want to hang on to their status quo as much as they can. I mean, I don't think they're looking to really change their ways. I really don't. And I don't think that they will unless, the incentive is going to be changed in terms of how they're compensated.
And that's financial reform. It also will depend on if this commission, which will have some subpoena power, eventually finds out, as they dig down, any kind of criminal activity. That could really change the game.
It could.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you guys very much. This was a fun start to the mid-morning mix. Tell us what you think about it. Go to abcnews.com, click on GMA, weigh in on television, weigh in on the bankers.